How are you? It's scary out there these days. The world is on fire, the world is in chaos, and today we're going to talk about courage, where it comes from, and what I think is a new kind of courage, maybe, or a new and very old kind of courage that we're going to need in this age of upset, of turbulence, of shock, of trauma, where human history has come to a turning point and we're not sure what is the road forward. It feels like the thread of civilization is fraying, maybe at breaking point. So, where do we begin to kind of repair that thread? What kind of courage does it really take to kind of be here in the 21st century? I'm going to take you through a few different kinds of courage, and then we're going to come to the kind of courage that I want to talk about. So, here's a quick distinction, which I think is a good one. It's a quote that I found very quickly. Bravery is spontaneous and involves setting fear aside. Courage is about having fear, being mindful of the risks, and making a conscious decision to do something anyways. So, I highlight that quote because it can feel like that's kind of where a lot of us are today. The conscious decision to do something anyways. It's scary, and sometimes can almost feel like we're paralyzed, right? Not sure. What should we be doing? Hard to have the courage to even just get through another week, another month, and stay focused, really stay in there. So, what is courage? Well, first of all, courage is a virtue, right? And virtues are cultivated. They're not things that, we read, that pop out of us at self-help books necessarily. Cultivated, that means that we have to reflect on them and interpret them and then begin to enact them in our own ways. And over time, like a muscle, we grow, we cultivate that virtue. So, what are some forms of courage that we should all be conversant with? So, here's moral courage. Moral courage, resolving to do the right thing, even if it puts you at personal risk of losing employment, isolation from peers, and other negative consequences. Moral courage, social courage, right? Related concepts. So, here are my values, here are my beliefs. I'm going to stand up for them, even if it means I face adversity, even if I take some heat and some blowback. Now, that's a good starting point, but it's not enough, because if you look around in the world today, there are a lot of people who will say pretty awful things. I believe that this kind of person should be subjugated, or women are this, or this kind of person shouldn't exist, or what have you. And whenever they face some consequences or blowback, they will cloak themselves in the flagpole, in the flag of courage. And they'll say, hey man, I'm the courageous one. I'm standing up for my beliefs and you're getting me for it, and all of this kind of thing. So it's not enough. That's not enough for us right now. And we can see that immediately, because if we all take that stance, hey, I'm going to say some repellent things, and I'm going to have these kind of noxious beliefs that are very malignant, harmful. I believe in, kind of subjugating, repressing, whatever, demeaning, belittling, hurting, abusing others. And the more you get me for it, that just proves how courageous I am. Where does that road end? Well, it's not working out for us very well, is it? Socially, politically, economically. It doesn't end in a good place. It ends in conflict, antagonism, stagnation. So immediately we can see that the kind of courage we need today has to be higher, deeper, stronger. So I call it existential courage. What do I mean by this? Well, one of my favorite metaphors is the way that Heidegger described it. So Heidegger had this idea that he called thrownness. And he said we are like balls. We're thrown into existence. We don't know who threw us. We don't know where we're going. We don't know if anybody's even going to catch us on the other side. We're just thrown into existence. And it's terrifying. And building on Heidegger's idea, some of the existentialists, Camus, Sartre, these kinds of guys, came up with a vocabulary to describe this sense of the human condition. Existential despair, angst. Camus called it absurd. So, it's scary. It's terrifying. Just existing. We are confronted by our finitude, by our mortality, by our powerlessness, by our helplessness. In the grandest sense, in the existential sense, in terms of creation and being itself. So we find different ways to deal with this in life, and probably the most, common way is consumerism, right? The norm. So we sublimate our anxieties and fears of existence into consumption. And we say, hey, I'm going to rise up the status ladder. I have more power than you, which proves at least I have power over something, if not creation itself, than you. And maybe some of this stuff will live on after me, and some sense of immortality there. Not a great answer, but it's our answer. Obviously, there's religion, there's work, there's all kinds of ways we deal with it. The sense of existential despair. So, existential courage, what is it about? It's not about you, really. It's about recognizing that this condition applies to every being, every life, everything in creation. This sense of fear, and loneliness, and despair, terror. Here I am. Who made me? What am I doing here? I know that I'm going to die. What am I supposed to do with this life? It's universal. And so if we begin to cultivate that sense of courage, perhaps we begin to shatter some of the old paradigms and make progress repairing this thread of human civilization that's fraying. Maybe we begin to value nature more and recognize that every being feels this way too. Maybe we begin to value each other more instead of being antagonistic towards each other and seeking power over each other, which is where we are today, and it's not working for us in any respect, politically, socially, economically. Maybe we begin to rebuild our economies focused around investment instead of consumption. So you see how big that paradigm shift immediately becomes if you think about it for just a few seconds. So, existential courage. I think it's very scary these days, right? There's this sense that you're kind of like, those very rickety bridges on like mountains that sometimes you see in movies seem to be made of like wire and a couple of planks. So it feels like we're like going across those bridges day after day after day. And you don't know, is the bridge going to give and I'm going to fall into the ravine or the river or whatnot. So existential courage is a way of crossing those bridges and going back and rebuilding them so others can follow in our footsteps. By making these paradigmatic changes that I'm talking about, beginning to reorient our lives in very deep and profound ways. And if we can do that, I think, then we repair that kind of fraying thread of civilization. If we can cross the bridge of an old paradigm, economically, socially, politically, we can rebuild the bridge. Others can cross on after us. So that's kind of the point of existential courage. And if I think about the world today, it is in a very bad place. It is in a very scary place. And we're not going to solve that without rebuilding a lot of things. But to rebuild those things requires courage on a different level. So that's why I call it existential courage. I think that without the courage to recognize that universal condition that's at the heart of being, at the heart of creation, and really say, look, this is a terrifying thing. It is so scary, just existing. It's a thing of pain and suffering and ignorance. It's a thing of intense agony and trauma and profound uncertainty, thrownness. You can see how the kind of existentialist view was almost Buddhist in a sense too, right? Without that kind of wisdom, it's going to be very, very difficult for us to shatter the old paradigms and rebuild the world. Repair that fraying thread of civilization, right? We can't do it the old way. So one of the things that I talked about recently was, as I called it, the most important chart of the 21st century, because I think it is. It shows negative affect exploding over the last 10 years. So what does that tell us? It tells us that the old ways of being are not working. It tells us that as things break down around us, of course we're growing more upset, stressed out, distressed, anxious, afraid, depressed, whatever you want to call it. So negative affect is exploding. And the ways that we use to kind of orient ourselves to deal with the pain and terror of existence, remember consumerism, it's not working anymore. Right? If it was, that line of negative affect wouldn't be exploding. So this age calls for really deep paradigmatic reinventions, not just of institutions and systems, but of us, who we are, how we think about life, our fundamental kind of orientations towards existence. And the other alternative is to go on and on that line of exploding negative affect and the kind of downwards trajectory of progress and civilization and economics and what have you. So that's not a very good option, right? So all of that is existential courage. And I know that's a lot. So I hope I didn't make your head explode. I hope I didn't make you cry. I hope that made a little bit of sense. I hope it was a little bit helpful. We'll talk more about it in future videos and posts. Thank you for joining me, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.